Welcome to Gamecock Pod Live.
For the next 3 to 4 years, I'll be committed to the University of Gamecock.
This is Rodgers again to the 25, 20, 15, 10. Rodgers scores! Oh, the Benedict does! Jackie Bradley Jr. delivered for the Gamecocks. Lost it up, looking for Kelly. Touchdown! Can you believe it?
And South Carolina is sending shockwaves through the SEC.
Frederick plays it in at the buzzer. That's a win! Unbelievable! I don't believe it!
And now, live from Studio 54 of the Gamecock Pod Studios, here's the Cockfather himself, Keith Alsep.
All right, everybody, good morning and welcome in to Gamecock Pod Live for April the 23rd, episode number 1734. We have got a great show lined up today. In just a couple minutes, we will be joined by Alex Jones from thebigspur.com. We'll complete our breakdown of Gamecock football for the spring. We'll focus on the defense. We'll get Alex's thoughts on the spring game. He was there. I was not. Many of you were not. But there were a lot of people that were there. I don't know if having it on a Friday night on Easter weekend is the best laid plan of men, but evidently, there was a good crowd. There were a lot of really good recruits for the 2026 class that were on hand. And so we'll get into that with Alex and the transfer portal as well. Then we will be joined by Jordan Kaye from the state and Go Gamecocks to get his thoughts on South Carolina's spring game. All right, today's show is brought to you by Nana's Porch, the award-winning full-service catering company servicing the greater Charlotte area. Nana's Porch is your go-to for all your catering needs, whether it's a banquet, a wedding, a corporate event, an anniversary celebration, a birthday party, graduation celebration. So go to nanasporch.com. That's NANASPORCH.com. Get in touch with my good friend Chris Payne. Tell him the Cockfather sent you. You'll love it. I guarantee it. And even if you don't have a catering event scheduled, go to nanasporch.com and order plenty of their award-winning pimento cheese. It's great for any occasion, any watch party, any get-together, and just to have in the refrigerator when you feel like you want a snack. So the toughest part of this is deciding, do I want smoky jalapeno or the great regular flavor? I say you can order plenty of both, and they'll ship it absolutely free of charge. Ordering and checking out are simple, safe, and secure. So order Nana's Porch award-winning pimento cheese just by clicking on pimento cheese from the homepage. All right, a few news notes and headlines before we are joined by Alex Jones from the Big Spur. South Carolina got their first walk-off non-conference extra inning win at home since 2016 last night, topping North Florida something the men's basketball team couldn't do. 3-2. The Gamecocks got a ground rule double from KJ Scobie in the bottom of the 10th, which scored Jordan Kaye and gave the Gamecocks a 3-2 walk-off win over North Florida last night at Ray Tanner Field. All right. Dawn Staley has added Wendell Farrow to her staff from Southern Cal. He was at UCLA with Corey Close. Then he went to Cal with Lindsey Gottlieb. Then joined her at Southern Cal. 5 seasons at Cal, including the first 3 with Lindsey Gottlieb. The Bears made the tournament with 3 20-win seasons. Prior to the West Coast, he worked with Vanderbilt head coach Melanie Balcom in her final season, and then she joined South Carolina's team as a special assistant the year they won the first national championship. He got his playing career started at American River Junior College in California. And so what Dawn Staley's added is somebody with a strong West Coast recruiting pedigree. He can coach the guards. He can coach wings and bigs. He's very versatile from a player development standpoint. But this is also a great pickup because of his recruiting prowess and pedigree on the West Coast, as a lot of the top high school players in the country have been coming out of the state of California. So, good pickup there. Gamecock men's basketball added Utah transfer guard 6'10" Mike Sharavamets. He is Mongolian, but born as a U.S. citizen. His father was the first Asian member of the Harlem Globetrotters. So the Gamecocks added him in the football transfer portal. Gamecocks lost Cam Pringle to go along with Wendell Gregory and Emory Floyd. And there could be one more player on the move as well. AT says his wife stole a smoky jalapeno. Well, AT, you just got to order some more. All right. Bear with me. We'll be right back following this old commercial message.
If you enjoy listening and watching the free Wednesday show, now live streaming on YouTube, and would love more Gamecock Pod daily, join our growing Gamecock family by becoming a monthly or annual subscriber. You'll be able to listen to the show every day of the week and listen to guests like J.C. Sherbert, Hale McGranahan, and John Whittle from thebigspur.com, Colin Taylor and Mike Uva from Gamecock Central, Emily Adams from the Greenville News, Ben Portnoy, Michael Lanana, and Jeremiah Holloway from GoGamecocks.com, Michael W. Bratton, the host of That SEC podcast, and many, many more. As a VIP subscriber, you can join or listen to the weekly live Zoom call with up to 100 of your favorite Gamecocks and friends. After the show is an unrecorded overtime segment where the real scoop gets dropped and discussed. It's like going down to your local pub or sports bar and having a conversation with your Gamecock friends about last week's football game, men's and women's basketball games, and Gamecock baseball. And of course, there's always recruiting to discuss. In addition to the weekly Zoom call, VIP subscribers get the most popular podcast, The Morning After, which is released every Sunday morning during football season, and more VIP perks are in the works. Follow Keith on Twitter @KAllset, or follow the show on Twitter @GamecockPod. Go to the top of the homepage and follow the link. If all else fails, go to patreon.com/GamecockPodDaily. Join now and get up to 3 months free off an annual VIP subscription. You will love it, guaranteed. Now, back to Gamecock Pod Live.
All right, we are back. Well, I was swamped yesterday and forgot to send out the invite, so hopefully Alex will be in soon. In the football transfer portal, UNC defensive end transfer portal target Bo Atkinson has signed with Ohio State. Texas signed Syracuse defensive tackle transfer portal target Murad Watson. Dylan Stewart was named to PFF's preseason All-America team. And Shane Beamer told the Florence, the media boys at a gathering of the Florence Gamecock Club for the Welcome Home Tour that Carolina's probably not going to sign a kicker. We'll discuss more of that with our guests. The NFL draft begins tomorrow night, and you could see a record number of Gamecocks selected in the NFL draft. First off the board, expected tomorrow night in the first round, Nick Eamon-Wari. Then defensive players TJ Sanders, Demetrius Knight, Kyle Kennard, and Tonka Hemingway all should be drafted over the next on Friday or Saturday. Offensively, Rocket Sanders, tight end Joshua Simon, and Torricelli Simpkins should be drafted, and punter Kai Kroger. I don't know how you cannot have him as a punter. All right, so as we all know, women's basketball, Malaysia Fulwiley officially entered the transfer portal on Monday. If you follow the X account Skim Milky, which is a spoof of Kim Mulkey, Skim Milky basically is the women's basketball version of Trilly Donovan. They break a lot of scoop on the transfer portal. He also has a premium Discord. And so we will not discuss. Well, I guess we will have to discuss it. Essentially, it was not her decision. It was people in her inner circle pressuring her to enter the transfer portal, to make demands to Dawn Staley. she had the meeting, said what she was told to say, and then regretted it, wanted to remain with the program, and Dawn Staley decided the juice was not worth the squeeze, and she's gone. I'm thinking it's either going to be Vanderbilt or LSU. Good luck playing for Kim Mulkey. And with that, we'll bring in Alex Jones, who looks like he got 15 minutes more sleep than I did last night. Alex, welcome in. Sorry about the delay. That's on me. So my dad had an expression, and yesterday is one of those days where you felt like you were busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking competition. And that was my day. I barely made it in from work in time for the Garnet and Black Town Hall. Then had to take care of a bunch of paperwork, and I went to bed and forgot to send out the invite. So I do apologize, but welcome home and welcome back into the show. And so, Alex, we've witnessed the first trade in major college football as Tennessee sent Nico Iamaleava to UCLA in exchange for quarterback Joey Aguilar and a player to be named later. Little did we know the player to be named later was his little brother, Madden Iamaleava, who is leaving Arkansas. And so I guess it's a family tradition. They're going back home to L.A. Joey Aguilar coming to Tennessee, which he was at App State prior to that, going to UCLA. Your thoughts on the first trade in the history of major college football?
It's the crazy times that we're in right now, but it's just an odd situation. Think about with Nico, like he was in a pretty good spot in Tennessee, had a really good offensive line that was coming back, had an offense that's really quarterback friendly. That Josh Heupel makes it really easy for quarterbacks. And it's just one of those things where I don't know if we've seen the number that he's going to get at UCLA yet, but you have to imagine it's not going to be what he was getting at Tennessee. So it's just one of those deals where I think maybe, they thought they could get something else, but now maybe this could be a sign for the future for some guys to kind of look towards and see like, hey, sometimes the grass isn't always greener.
So I got news for him. He was set to make $2.4 million more at Tennessee for the upcoming year. Okay, we all know he got about $7 million for signing with Tennessee when he signed. And so now his dad, and I mentioned this on the pod, these helicopter parents are like the cheerleader moms of the 80s and the pageant moms of the 90s. And now it's the dads and the moms. We know Jordan Birch's mom was a helicopter mom. She basically ran his life. Clearly, Nico Iamaleava's dad runs his life. And they have an agent that was an off-the-field staffer at Florida who's not even a licensed sports agent. And we've seen Malaysia Fulwiley's mom running her life and fired her agent because she couldn't get her more money to leave South Carolina when she played terrible in the national championship game and got her pocket picked clean by a girl playing basically on one leg. I mean, these players need to have certified agents that go through a clearinghouse, just like professional athletes have, And the parents need to stay the hell out of their lives and let them grow up and be adults. After all, they are in college.
Yeah, I think the agent thing's the biggest thing there. Like they've got to find a way to make sure that these agents that are representing these players are certified and or have the best interest of the players in mind. Because I think a lot of times we're seeing that these agents sometimes don't have the best interest of the players in mind. They just kind of whatever helps them out. So I think that's something that there's a lot of things in college sports that need to be fixed, but I think that's definitely one of them.
No doubt. So, Alex, I'm assuming you were at the spring football game.
Yep.
So describe the scene inside Williams-Brice Stadium, the crowd, the atmosphere. What was it like on Friday night?
Yeah, it was a great crowd. And I think that, a lot of that was obviously the season that South Carolina's coming off of, but then also in the game not being on TV, that was a chance for, I think that also drove some more fans into the stadium just because, that was going to be your only chance to see South Carolina this spring. But, I thought it was a really great crowd, really great atmosphere. And, the recruits took notice of that. They could see the atmosphere that was created in Williams-Brice, and it was all in all a good night for South Carolina.
All right, so give me your top 3 or 4 takeaways from the spring game.
I think the first player, I'll go with a player. The first player that caught my eye was Cutter Woods. Like he was really good on Friday night, and he was like his first throw that he came in, it was a 50-yard bomb. I think I can't remember the receiver it was to, but I heard some good things about him. Specifically in the second scrimmage, but really along spring practice, and I thought he was really good and shined in that. We obviously know quarterback 1's going to be Lenora Sellers, but that quarterback 2 battle has been pretty even. And, I thought Cutter Woods kind of made a statement in that spring game. He looked really good. And, Aaron Nolan had his moments as well. But, I thought Cutter Woods really looked good. And, those freshman wide receivers, they get a lot of talk. And, and I thought the returners had their moments as well. But those freshman guys, I thought Brian Rowe looked really good. He had a couple of really nice catches, one from Cutter Woods. And then Malik Clark had a nice back shoulder throw that I think was from Luke Doty right before halftime. And so those 2 were the freshman wide receivers that shined, and some of those other guys made plays as well. But it was hard to get too much from it just because the teams were so split up. You couldn't really get a whole lot from a really a line of scrimmage standpoint just because the offensive line was split up and really the defensive line as well. And so I thought those are some of the few things that caught my eye was just some individual players. And, I think we'll probably get to it here, but Mason Love was one too that kind of stood out. Like they had a little bit of a field goal competition, kind of a pressure situation moment. And he was the one that he made his, I think it was a 40-yard field goal. And when he was kicking them, it probably could have been good from 50 or so. Like he was booming those kicks and looked really good. And so we'll see kind of what happens there from that special team standpoint. That's a really interesting storyline still.
Yep. So I will say it appears as though Luke Doty has clearly inserted himself in the race to be QB2.
Yeah.
Along with Cutter Woods, who JC and also a guy that I spoke with is crazy. Just a fan who was at the game said, this guy reminds me of Colt McCoy. And, that's a pretty good. If he turns out to be Colt McCoy, South Carolina's in business there. I still think Prentice Nolan, when it's all said and done, will have a lot to say about this backup quarterback race. And then I guess Shane Beamer told the media boys in Florence that can't guarantee not going to take a kicker, but probably not. I still think that's a huge risk, but I hadn't been at practice, and so maybe they do feel good with Mason Love kicking field goals and punting. Hopefully he won't have to kick off too. Maybe Max Kelly can handle that. Who were the holders? Because South Carolina has had a guy that was a threat to run and a threat to pass as their holder in Kai Kroger.
Yeah, I think they were kind of just moving around in this little field goal competition. They were just kind of letting like Joyce or Peyton Argent, those guys kind of do the holding, and we'll see kind of where that goes because I think Mason Love was also working as a holder. But as you mentioned, like it seems like Mason Love's kind of trending for both punter and kicker, and I think right now that's their best option. And it's going to be interesting to see if that's what ends up happening because I think you also have to make sure that he's being, and Shane Beamer mentioned this too a few weeks ago in a press conference with Mason Love, to make sure that he's maximizing his potential at both of those spots. But so far in spring practice, from what I've heard, and then also what we saw in the spring game, like he looked really good and looked like he could handle both. And then I think, as you mentioned, you'd hope somebody else could handle the kickoff duties to let somebody else do that, not let Mason Love have to do that as well.
Yeah, it'd probably be good if he doesn't have to hold and kick as well.
Yeah.
If he's Barry Allen, if he could be transformed into him. And so Craig makes a good point that I was going to make on Nico. Okay, he was going to get $2.4 million for being in Tennessee, which has no state income tax. Okay. California has the highest state income tax in America. And not only that, living in LA, you have the highest cost of living in the country, or one of them. And so he's going to make half as much in real dollars, like 1.2, or just in the dollar amount. But in real dollars, he's probably going to make like $250,000 when you consider cost of living and state tax. Worst deal in the history of sports as far as money is concerned.
Yeah, it just goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like I have to imagine he's not going to make close to what he was making at Tennessee. And again, he was in a great spot at Tennessee, a good offense, a quarterback friendly offense that, Josh Heupel does a great job of helping quarterbacks and developing quarterbacks. And, we'll see how it turns out at UCLA. Like we'll just see how it turns out in LA for him going back home.
All right. So Alex, last week we talked about the offense. So we talked about backup quarterback. Let's talk about defense. Let's talk about the defensive end position. What about the Ant-Man, Anthony Addison from Florence? Evidently, he flashed Dez Umeozulu. Of course, at times, I'm sure these guys were going up against some walk-ons because South Carolina not only had the offensive line split up, you also had some guys who did not play. Mm-hmm. But what's your overall impression of the defensive end room after viewing the spring game?
Yeah, to your point, Anthony Addison, I think he had a solid day overall, and I think he had a solid spring practice as well. And he's a guy that's got a high motor guy, and I think just having a year or having a spring to develop under Sterling Lucas is going to help him. And with the depth of that edge room, like he may be called upon a little bit more than we originally thought, just because of losing Wendell Gregory to the transfer portal, and we'll see with Jaylen Brown and his injury what the extent of that one is. But he's a guy, both of those freshmen, Anthony Addison and Jaquavius Dodd, and maybe called on a little bit more than they thought, and then we'll see what South Carolina does in the transfer portal as well. But Dylan Stewart, virtually kind of unblockable a little bit at times on Friday night, and then they kind of let those other guys get into guys like Dez, who it's a big year for Dez, and I think it seems like he's ready to take that next step because he physically is ready to go, but I think now he'll be called upon more on the field, and we'll see how he responds. But I think the edge room is okay right now. It's just going to be interesting to see from a depth standpoint, like what they do in the transfer portal to see if they add another one. Obviously, a lot of people are focused on Bo Atkinson right now and seeing what South Carolina can do there. But I think the edge room is in a good spot, and then we'll see what they do from a transfer portal standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like he's headed to Ohio State. So, I mean, what about JT Gear? I mean, it's a guy that started the first game of the season last year. He's battled injuries. It seems like he's finally healthy. Any observations on him and Brian Thomas Jr.?
Yeah, with Brian Thomas, I think you could. If I was penciling in a depth chart, I think I'd pencil him in as a starter right now, opposite of Dylan Stewart. And he's a guy who last year just had a solid, really kind of a sneaky solid season. I think he would end up being about 4.5 tackles for a loss or so. And he's a guy. I think I've talked about on here with you before. Like when he comes into the game, he just goes all out, gives 110%, and really can make plays. And I think the key him is just continuing to improve in the run game. I think that's something to continue to work on. But when they get in obvious passing down situations, he's got moves. Sterling Lucas has really developed him. And with JT Gear, I think it's just he's finally healthy and seeing where he fits in on the depth chart. But I think with Brian Thomas, I like where he is right now, pencil in the start. And they got some depth. Got a few guys in the depth with him, JT Gear and those freshmen. And then you got Damon Clowney, who will also be in. It's going to be interesting to see how he performs.
No doubt. All right. So how about defensive tackle? This is a position Shane Beamer has lamented the lack of depth. It does look like Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy and Monkel Goodwine both had good springs. Nick Barrett. But what about the overall depth of the room? And I know South Carolina was chasing the Syracuse defensive tackle, Murad Watson. He signed with Texas. Is it Starlings at North Carolina they're involved with? They're involved with a kid from Georgia State who's got several big-time visits lined up. How's South Carolina looking on that interior of the defensive front?
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the main spots they attack in the transfer portal. Just, I think they like, some of the guys in there, but they just need from a depth standpoint, need to add a few more in there. Just from what they lost last year, you're going to have at least, 2 guys that are going to be drafted in the draft this weekend, and TJ Sanders and Tonka Hemingway. But then guys like DeAndre Jules or Alex Huntley could sneak in there, maybe late rounds of the draft, but I can see them being free agent guys. But, to the room, I think Gabriel Brownlow-Dindy had a very solid spring, and I think that was key for him to come in and be able to have that just from those guys that we mentioned that they lost. But Devontae Miles is another one to keep an eye on there, that he can also be a guy that could sneak in there into the depth chart. But guys like Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwine, like those guys are coming back and returners and understand what Travion Robinson wants in that room. And it kind of sounds like Nick Barrett has also taken on a leadership role in that room, which is what you'd expect from a guy who he's been around the program for a while. But on the field, I think those guys also had a solid spring. But I think that's going to be a spot that's going to be one of the top priorities from in the transfer portal. Maybe see if they can add a guy that's could come in and be a starter right away. But at the very least, they need to add a little bit of depth in that room as well, just because of how much they like to rotate in that room. We saw it last year with Travion Robinson and all the guys that had in that room. They rotate very heavily and very often. So that's, if they're going to continue to do that, I think they need to see if they can add at least one.
Well, I think that's because that's what his coach did when he was at South Carolina. They had a lot of guys that they could rotate on the interior. All right, so at linebacker, it looks like Sean Murphy has made a big move to join J.R. Johnson, and then we have Justin Okoronkwo. We know those are going to probably be the top 3 guys. Who's going to be the 4th linebacker? Because I could see Jaron Willis being a situational edge rusher at 254 pounds. Would it be Josh Smith, Donovan Darden? Who could be the 4th linebacker?
Yeah, I could see it being Jaron Willis. I thought he flashed a little bit or the other night in the spring game, and he's a guy you mentioned kind of has added some good weight from last year to this year. And I think, South Carolina moved to that 3-3-5, which they could every now and then defensively. Maybe you see him out there with either Justin Okoronkwo and Fred Johnson, or, I thought you mentioned Sean Murphy. I think he continued to improve and, understanding what's Clayton White's defense throughout spring practice. And I like that linebacker room and think it can be really good and kind of a sneaky good room. Like Fred Johnson, when he got in there and played last year, he was really good. And now he's kind of, from talking to the players and press conferences, kind of like he's even taking on more of a leadership role, being a guy that's a returner in there. But, Justin Okoronkwo, like I think don't sleep on him. Like he's a guy who, we've talked about on here before. Like he had a really good, for a solid first year at Alabama. And you can watch some of his spring game highlights from last year for the Crimson Tide, and he flashed. And I think he was just behind some guys, a guy like Jahad Campbell, who's got a chance to be a first round pick. And so I think that linebacker room's in a good spot, and it's pretty good to say considering what they lost in that room as well. Got the Demetrius Knight, Debo, Bam, Martin Scott, like they lost a lot in that room, but they've done a pretty good job of filling in that room. And then the freshman in there as well, Josh Smith, I think from Dutch Fork, he's got a chance to be pretty solid overall as well. And Donovan Darden continues to get better. And AJ Holloway, Tayshawn Alston, like it's a kind of a deep room, like a little bit of inexperience kind of towards the back end of that room with all those freshmen. But it's going to be interesting. Jerron Wills is going to be one to watch in preseason camp just to see what he can do to either rise the depth chart or be a guy like you mentioned as a situational type of guy that if they move into a 3-3-5 and want to rush the passer, he could be a guy that could rush off the edge, and it'd be really intriguing to see.
No doubt. So, I mean, the secondary is just stacked.
Yeah.
At corner, with Vakari Swain out for spring. Brandon Cisse looked like he seized control of that cornerback spot opposite Judge Collier, but Swain comes back, Miles Norwood, Jalewis Solomon, even, Isaiah McClary and DeMarcus Leach are guys in that room. And so talk to us about just the depth and what you expect come the fall in this cornerback room.
Yeah, that's you mentioned the secondary. It's a stacked room, and they've done a great job of filling that room. But corner is going to be interesting to see how it evolves. Like obviously, I think you're coming into spring practice, you have thought Vakari Swain may would have had a chance to seize control of that number one corner spot opposite of Judge Collier, but obviously his situation popped up. But sounds like everything's okay there, and he'll be back. As Shane Beamer said a few weeks ago, sooner rather than later. So it's going to be interesting to see how it all turns out, just because it may end up being that Brandon Cisse is going to be too good to keep off the field. And so how do they kind of fit all the pieces in there? Is Vakari Swain kind of that backup, first cornerback off the field, on the field as a backup? Like they got a lot of different options. Like could they move in obvious passing down situations? Can they move Cisse into that nickel spot, Jalen Kilgore back to safety, and move Vakari Swain into corner? Because then at that point you got four really good covers in there, and that'd be something that'd be hard to pass against. Plus, then you got DQ Smith, who could be kind of a roaming safety back there. And I mean, you saw him in the spring game have an interception where he was kind of anticipating a pass, and he came up and intercepted it. And so I think that's something that's really kind of intriguing to when those obvious passing situations happen. Like what does South Carolina do? Because there's a lot of different options there at each spot, and it's a strong depth at every spot, corner, safety, nickel. They've got a lot of different options they can go to, and those second-year players I think have made a nice jump so far. Guys like David Busey, I thought had his moments the other night. Kelvin Hunter, Jalewis Solomon. Jalewis wasn't playing, but I think it was just a little nicked up in the game or before the game. But he's a guy who they still have high hopes for.
All right, so at nickel, we know Jalen Kilgore can play there. Zabari Sandy's back working at corner and nickel. I mean, he's a really big guy. Jaquel Hallman's the guy they've been working at nickel. It sounds like they moved Kelvin Hunter back to that safety spot to compete with Peyton Williams and maybe Kendall Daniels Jr. And then behind DQ Smith, you got Busey, Gerald Kilgore, and maybe even a guy like Buddy Mack, who excelled on special teams last year.
Yeah, as you're going through all those names, it's a lot of quality options they have at each position. And that safety spot, or the opposite safety spot of DQ Smith, is one really going to continue to interesting to watch, because Peyton Williams is a guy, like, it seems like every time he comes in the game, his first 3 years at South Carolina, he makes plays. Like you think about that Tennessee game a few years ago, Vanderbilt when he came in for DQ Smith when he was hurt. He made a big play on 4th down and plays throughout that game. And so we'll see kind of how it turns out. Like, I think if I had to choose who would start right now, I think it'd be Peyton Williams. But that's a competition that's going to keep on going because there is so many options. Like David Busey, I really like him, and he played on special teams last year, and a guy that he's a physical defender. Like, he'll come up and he'll hit you hard, and you saw that last year. So it's really interesting to watch to see what that secondary happens because they almost can't go wrong with anybody they decide at each of those positions. Like, there's so many different options they can go to.
No doubt. All right, so a lot of big-time recruits inside Williams-Brice Stadium. Give us some of the highlights of the guys that were there, and then maybe a couple of guys that you think could end up in being the next commitments in this recruiting class.
Yeah, so it was a solid list before, then ended up being even better by the time the game happened. And I think Carter Meadows was a guy that's we knew about or was an addition to the list, and he's a guy that's they've kind of made a move with a little bit, and we'll see. He's a 4-star edge, top 40 player in the country out of Gonzaga College in Washington D.C. And they'll have some challenges with him or some other teams that are coming after him as well, obviously, but. I think South Carolina's made a decent move there. And really, it was, you look at it, the 2027 class, like it was a great list of guys that were there. And, another one, 2027 to mention was Xavier Tiller, who's a 6'4" tight end out of Fairburn, Georgia, and Langston Hughes. And so he was one that came in that's a teammate of Carson Baker. And he's one that he's a really good tight end. So it'd be interesting to watch with him. And, it's just ended up being an overall really good list. Julian Walker was also there. And, I think it ended up being 2 guys in the 2027 class. Like, I think by the 24/7 rankings ended up coming were LaDamian Guyton at edge out of Savannah, Georgia, and DJ Jacobs that's also in Georgia out of Roswell. 2 guys who are listed at edge that are top 2 players in the country. They were also in. So, spring game can be a big kind of visit list for those future classes just because that's when those relationships are really starting to build. But, they're trying to finish off this 2026 class, and they're still going after a lot of those guys, but then we'll see what else they can do in this 2027 class because it's a loaded in-state class. Like the 24/7 rankings are coming out for the 2027 class today, and it's a loaded in-state. It's going to be a big-time in-state class, and that's big for South Carolina with how hard they attack in-state recruiting. And it's also there's some high-level guys in that class. Josh Dobson was at the game. He's a guy who's going to be one of the best cornerbacks in the country in that 2027 class, and he's an in-state guy. And Sequel Patterson, I think that's an electric player on both sides of the ball out of Indian land. Like he can do it all on both sides of the ball, and I think they're going to kind of look at him at wide receiver, but he's going to be a high-level guy. And it's going to be a deep class, and some of these other states, North Carolina is going to be deep, but it's going to be a really fun recruiting battles to watch in these in-state guys 2027.
All right, so give me one name that you think will be in the 2026 class that was present Friday night at Williams-Brice Stadium.
Tamarian Watkins. I think he's one that they've been recruiting for a while, and he's kind of blown up here since really a year ago. I remember going and watching him do like a combined practices with a bunch of teams up in that Rock Hill area, and he was one that was kind of lightly known at that point. And I remember talking to him and hearing who all the schools were talking to him, and then South Carolina offered in the summer, and he's really blown up. Georgia's after him hard. Texas A&M is after him hard. Like he continues to rack in offers, but. In-state guys, like as I mentioned with that 2027 class, they do a really good job there. And Torian Gray has built a really solid relationship with Tamarian Watkins, and he's a guy that was there on Saturday night and visited a lot. So I think I would go with him from the guys.
I thought you were going to say Julian Walker, but
you could easily go him too. Like there's a few different guys. Like you could go Julian Walker as well. Like he's one that I would also choose.
All right, Alex, great stuff. I can't thank you enough for being on. Be well, get some rest, maybe go on vacation like Jack Veltri and some other guys and decompress because recruiting never sleeps. Coaches are out on the road. The transfer portal has got 2 more days, but as long as you're in the transfer portal, you can visit and sign at any time. And so South Carolina, adding Damon Clowney, but still wanting to add more guys up front on defense. And I'm still hoping and praying that Joe B. Camillus gets up on Shane Beamer's desk and jumps up and down and holds his breath until Beamer agrees to take a field goal kicker. So be well. We'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. And thanks for hopping on today. Great stuff as always.
Always appreciate being on. Thanks for having me. See you next time.
Yep. All right, and we go from Alex Jones to our man with the state and Go Gamecocks and resident Sun Devil aficionado, Jordan Kaye, also played at the Masters last year, so I guess you didn't get to play this year.
Correct.
But it's been a minute. How you been, my friend? What's going on?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. As I told Alex, some days I feel like I'm busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking competition, but it's all good. All right, so you were at the spring game on Friday night. What were your thoughts on the crowd and the atmosphere and just the sights and sounds inside Williams-Brice Stadium? What was it like versus what you expected it would be like?
I thought it was a solid crowd, especially for Easter weekend. They reported like 35,000, which is pretty on par with what they did, I think, like the last year, maybe even last 2 years. So that was solid. I mean, they inflate those numbers a little bit, but pretty good. I thought it was odd that they blocked off one side, but then I realized they were shooting fireworks off from that east side. And so that made more sense. I think it was also so you could shoot pictures and it looked really full because you only shoot one side. So it was a little strategic placement there. But I thought it was just a great atmosphere. They did a really good job, and it's kind of one of those things where when you talk about what you lose when you get rid of a spring game, it's you lose 30,000 people showing up in the middle of April to just hang out and talk about Gamecock football. And it's one of those things that I think coaches sometimes forget as they're trying to, worry about the transfer portal is like, this does mean something to a lot of people. And it was cool to see amidst all these schools canceling it, South Carolina embrace it on an Easter weekend, and 30,000 people show up and have a hell of a time.
And a ton of blue chip recruits as well.
Yeah.
Which, I think that makes a good impression on them. All right, so we talked the defense mostly with Alex. Offensively, it looks like Luke Doty has firmly inserted himself in the backup quarterback battle. The backup quarterback's generally the most popular guy on campus, although just like when Spencer Rattler was the starter coming off the season, Lenora Sellers had, I don't think that will necessarily be the case at South Carolina. But just your thoughts on the quarterbacks not named Lenora Sellers.
Yeah, I even asked Shane Beamer after the game of like, is the Luke Doty thing real? Like, is he really competing for the backup quarterback? And I think Shane was like, he's like, absolutely. Which is, fair. But if you're looking at precedent, like the last 2 years, he's started like spring and even sometimes fall in that green jersey as a quarterback. And he never even gets close to playing quarterback. And so, he threw on the green jersey to start this spring. And to me, it was like, oh, that's nice. He'll probably fill in, help with depth for the first couple of weeks. By the end of spring, he'll be a full-time wide receiver, be a really important part of special teams. And sure enough, he comes and is starting for the Garnet team in the spring game, and he looked good. I completed 10 of 12 passes. It's not like he was, chucking the ball down the field or, firing balls into tight windows or anything like that. But the guy knew how to operate the offense, was really good, at least throwing the ball, made smart decisions. His throw to Malik Clark, even he said he was a little jumpy with it because he couldn't believe that the defense gave him the look they did. And so he kind of flung it a little too outside, but hey, Malik Clark still got it. And the fact that he was above Dante Reno, I know Shane Beamer doesn't want to, talk about depth chart, but that was a little interesting that Luke Doty was out there with the above Dante Reno on the same team. I thought Cutter Woods, I love that kid. Even going back to high school, what he did at Westside, I saw him in 2 straight state title games. The guy just knows how to operate an offense, throws one of the prettiest deep balls I've ever seen from a high school quarterback, and he showed it again with that 51-yard bomb. Seemed like he just knew how to operate the offense. Like he knew the playbook really, really well, which is often not the case for a guy in his first semester of college, kind of learning on the fly. That impressed me. Aaron Nolan didn't impress me a ton. And, you got to give him a lot of the benefit of the doubt because he's coming from a whole system. So he has to unlearn his Ohio State system and then learn the South Carolina system. And it just didn't seem like he was completely comfortable quite yet. And so it'll be interesting to see how he kind of progresses this summer and into the fall once he gets the playbook down and we can maybe see his arm strength a little bit. But it really seems like, last year, everyone knew that Lenoris was basically going to be the starting quarterback. This year, I feel like there's still 3 guys who could end up being the backup quarterback.
That's a great situation. I will say this, Luke Doty, Shane Beamer's first year, went through spring practice as a starter, entered fall camp as a starter. Then the offensive coordinator let Jordan Birch get close enough to him in a drill to step on his foot and break his foot. And so they had to go with a graduate assistant. And then Luke Doty comes back in the Georgia game and starts slinging it around. And he played winning football until he re-broke his foot in the Vanderbilt game. And so he's played and started in more college football games than everybody else in that quarterback room combined.
He also hasn't. That also was 3 or 4 years ago.
Yeah,
but yeah. Yes, your point is valid, but yeah, it's crazy that he has shown to be a good quarterback, just not in years.
No doubt. Look, I'm not saying he's pushing Lenore Sellers or anything. I just think it's comforting to have a veteran guy that has been around for a long time and has played winning football.
Yeah.
Albeit in 2021. But he has stuck with it. All right. I think it's really hard in spring games to take anything away from the run game because the O-lines are split. And not only that, there were some guys missing, and so there were a lot of walk-ons out there. Did anybody really catch your attention at running back?
I thought Matthew Fuller, the redshirt freshman, looked really good. Again, pretty hard to tell. I thought Rasul Faison looked solid when he caught the ball. There was just those 2 guys, it seemed like anytime they touched the ball, there was a certain burst that we haven't seen a lot from South Carolina running backs. And maybe that's a overreaction from a spring game, but it did seem pretty clear that they caught the ball and their acceleration was next level. I thought Faison too was really good at breaking tackles. Like he would go into contact and he would bounce off. And that was really impressive to see. Again, spring game, tough to tell, but I thought that was kind of something we saw from his Utah State highlights that is already kind of translating against the SEC competition.
All right, so freshman wide receivers, that's been a lot of the talk. Brian Rowe and Malik Clark have gotten the majority of the conversation on that. Your thoughts overall on the wide receivers? I know Vandrevis Jacobs had a big catch from Cutter Woods, and then Malik Clark, I thought that was a highlight reel catch, making the diving catch, getting his feet down and over the pylon for the score. Brian Rowe holding on to that ball at the 1 yard line after getting absolutely crushed on that big hit. I don't even know who it was that hit him, but just your thoughts on the pass catchers.
Yeah, I thought it was I think I kind of agree with you where it seemed like Brian Rowe and Malik Clark were the two of the 5 freshmen who are already on campus. Those were the two that looked just far and away like the top guys and have a really good chance of starting. Brian Rowe, just his route running, like he was just always open. And I thought one of the traits you don't always see from young guys is he was so aware of like coming back to the ball. If the play broke down, he was always looking at the quarterback and like coming back to the ball. He was trying to like work with the quarterback. And there were a number of times where it was either Lenore Sellers or Ayers Noland who kind of caught him after a play already broke down. And so that was really impressive. The catch from Malik Clark, like you're saying, was incredible. And then Vandrevis Jacobs, who didn't have a great season last year, that catch he made with Cutter Woods was really good. And I thought he looked a lot sharper.
Yeah, I mean, the talent is there for him. I think Jordan is dealing with his dog. There we go. I think your dog agrees Brian Rowe is going to be a stud.
Dog loves Brian Rowe. Was just watching the spring game, listening on the radio, and was just barking every time Brian Rowe caught a pass. It's incredible.
So Michael Smith was out for spring at tight end. That gave, a guy like Jordan Dingle, who transferred from Kentucky, who I think was probably underutilized, more of a chance. And then Brady Hunt and Maurice Brown. What do you think about South Carolina's tight end room?
It's tough to tell. I mean, I thought Jordan Dingle, the Kentucky transfer, looked solid. But this is a tight end room where I think Michael Smith's going to be the star. And it's just tough because he didn't play. I mean, Brady Hunt was good last year. I think he'll be improved this season, especially, without the injury that he suffered towards the end of last season. But Michael Smith, to me, is the guy who is going to be probably tight end 1. He was so impressive last year with a whole nother season under his belt. And I mean, if you remember, he didn't come in until the fall. So he was doing all that stuff with very limited stuff. To him, miss the spring this year probably doesn't help a ton, but his talent, athleticism is so good that I would be shocked if he does not lead the tight end room in catches. And so, you can look at what the tight ends did this spring, and to me, there's a giant caveat because he wasn't playing.
No doubt. So South Carolina needed to replace Vershawn Lee at center. It looks like Georgia Military and Troy transfer Boaz Stanley has taken that job, and by all accounts, very athletic, leadership qualities. Also, Rodney Newsom, the Western Kentucky transfer, working at center. How were the quarterback center exchanges and the snaps overall during the spring game?
It was hardly noticeable except for one where Rodney Newsom threw it over Lenore Sellers' head. But other than that, it's not like I was really watching the quarterback center exchanges. I thought it was pretty interesting that Shane Beamer, a guy who loves talking about competition and hates the depth chart, was pretty clear after the spring game to be like, hey, coming out of spring, Boaz Stanley is our starting center. And the only other time I remember him kind of saying that is last year. He was pretty clear, like O'Donnell Fortune was a starting corner and Lenora Sellers was a starting quarterback. And so to me, that's a pretty good indication that whatever the heck Boaz Stanley is doing, he is far and away above everyone else. And so that was probably noticeable. And then, I'm sure you're going to touch on the guards and stuff. And to me, that's a pick a name out of a hat. I have no idea who's going to win these guard positions. It seems like they've got 50 guys rotating around. And then you throw in, Tree Babalade and Trevon Baugh and these youngsters in there. And it's really tough to tell. Nick Sharp, I think, is going to be in that mix. And he missed a lot of spring ball with an injury. Though I think Wake Forest transfer. And then Shane Beamer and all these coaches are so high on the freshman Shed Surratt. Beamer even said during his welcome home tour, this kid is going to play a lot, and was pretty emphatic about that. And you do not hear that very often about a freshman offensive lineman. And to me, that kind of struck me as, okay, is Shed Surratt does he have a really good chance of earning one of those starting jobs? And it's just tough with how many injuries, freshmen. I'm not sure who's going to win that job, but seems like Shed Surratt and Nick Sharp are in decent position, it would seem. And then Tree Babalade and Trevon Baugh. This was their first time practicing at guard. And so we'll see how much they improve over this summer and into the fall.
Yeah, I think that's one reason why you saw Cam Pringle enter the transfer portal. I mean, even back during winter workouts, I think of all the guys that came in, Shed Surratt from Gaffney probably surprised even the coaching staff more than anybody else because of just how athletic he was. There was some consideration of using him at defensive tackle because of how athletic he is. And of course, South Carolina still has needs at that position, but I think it'll be Tree Babalade and Trevon Baugh. That's just my personal opinion. And then you'll have Josiah Thompson and either Kason Henry or Jatavius Shivers at right tackle. I say that only because Kason Henry stayed healthy last year. He did have some problems with more athletic edge rushers, but now it seems the injury bug is back. And I think Jatavius Shivers is good enough to be a starting tackle in the SEC. So they have options there. So I want to get your take because I mentioned this with Alex. This is more of a college football thing. So we saw the first major trade in the history of major college football. Tennessee sends Nico Iamaleava and a player to be named later to UCLA in exchange for quarterback Joey Aguilar. We find out the player to be named later is Nico's little brother, Madden Iamaleava. And this is just a complete shit show. Iamaleava's dad, they're leaving on the table, if you consider real dollars, okay, $2.4 million from Tennessee. He's going to get half that from UCLA. There's no state income tax, and the cost of living is not that high in Knoxville. California has the highest state income tax in the country, and the cost of living in Los Angeles is significantly higher. I mean, this guy his dad hosed him on his NIL money.
there's just no logic to it. You know, you can keep trying to explain it to yourself and wonder, and it's just like, it doesn't make any sense. Yeah, you know, you would think that there's bad people in his ear, but even that seems like there's got to be more to that story, because normally if someone enters the transfer portal, they have at least kind of their agent has inquired with other teams and at least gotten some sort of a dollar figure. And maybe it's off. It's not off by $2 million. So there's something weird, and I don't really know. I heard someone bring up that, you know, could actually, you know, I can't imagine this would be a reason to transfer, but, you know, it could actually help his draft stock. Just Tennessee runs a pretty quarterback friendly system. It's not super hard, first read, whatever. You know, it kind of will be interesting now to see him operate perhaps more of a different offense where it's not, you know, not super as easy for a quarterback to succeed. So that'll be interesting, I guess. But yeah, I mean, there's no logic. The more you try and explain it to yourself, the more you get more confused. So I'm with you. I'm kind of scratching my head like, did someone give it bad info? Is there something else at play? It's a tough one.
Well, and you add the fact that he's leaving a national championship quarterback as his head coach. Okay, a quarterback guru. All right, to go play for is it Jerome Foster, who played defense and who's never coached before until they said, "Hey, you want to replace Chip Kelly since he's leaving to go be an offensive coordinator at Ohio State?" Sure, I'll take the job. I mean, clearly he got bad advice. Clearly, you know, these helicopter parents are making decisions for their children who are young men and women in college that make no sense whatsoever. It's kind of like the pageant moms of the 1980s and the cheerleader moms. And so at any rate, all right, last question. Your thoughts on Shane Beamer telling the media boys in Florence on Monday night, well, I just don't think we're going to sign a kicker. We're going to go again with a guy that's never kicked a field goal in a college football game.
I thought it was crazy, to be honest. And I wasn't sure if it was one of those things where he's kind of just saying, hey, I don't think we're going to sign a kicker. Meanwhile, they're looking for a kicker, and if they have an opportunity to sign it, they'll sign one. And it's just one of those things to kind of not piss off all the current kickers or anything like that. So perhaps we'll see. But yeah, I don't get it. I just don't get it. I thought it was crazy last year that they didn't sign a kicker or in the transfer portal. I thought it was crazy they didn't sign a kicker in December. If they don't sign one now, I'll think it's still crazy. It just doesn't. It's just insane. It's crazy to me that Shane Beamer, who his big thing coming out of spring is, man, I'm really worried about the special teams, and he's a big special teams guy, and he talks about wanting to increase the competition in every room. And I feel like the only way to do that is to add a transfer portal kicker right now. They obviously have the freshman, I think Max Kelly, coming in. That will increase the competition. You can't add 1 million kickers given the scholarship or the roster limits coming up. So this is not a case of, hey, let's have 10 kickers and best man wins. You can't quite do that. So I understand a little bit. He's not in like the easiest position, but yeah, I would think you have to add a kicker. If it is Mason Love, though, I guess that's not the worst case scenario. Like, he has looked good. I've heard even last year he looked really good at kicker. So that's okay, but yeah, not ideal.
All right, so just general thoughts on, we won't get into the secondary because I think that's the one area of the defense that is deep and talented, as we were discussing that with Alex when you first popped in. But what about the front six, the defensive front, and then the linebackers? And let's start with linebacker because they are going to be younger there, but it appears J.R. Johnson, Murphy, and Justin Okoronkwo have kind of separated themselves, and that's going to be the top three guys. And all three of those guys are big, fast, and athletic.
Yeah, I mean, they're replacing a lot, but I like those guys. I mean, Fred Johnson's a stud. I thought the J.O. kid from Alabama looked solid. And then, I think Brownlow Dindy's had his moments on Friday, and then the coaches have just raved about what Nick Barrett and Monkel Goodwine have done at defensive tackle, which makes you feel a little better considering they're losing, Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders, Boogie Huntley. So it's not a complete dire situation, but again, it's, a lot of these guys lack the just 12-game starter experience. And so you're kind of going in with this big question mark a little bit.
How about the defensive ends? Outside of Dylan Stewart, anybody put your eye there?
I thought Desmond Umazulu, I thought he was the star at edge during the spring game. Just really fast, was constantly in the backfield. Kind of reminded me of what Dylan Stewart was doing last spring game, where it's just he wasn't necessarily getting snacks or touching the quarterback, but disrupting plays. And then I thought the freshman Anthony Addison, I'm not sure how much he'll play, but had a couple plays where, he was just getting after the quarterback. The interception that Aaron Nolan threw, that was all because Anthony Addison was flying off the edge and got into Aaron Nolan's face. And so that's one to watch. And then we didn't see him a ton during the spring game show out, but I think Brian Thomas Jr. is clearly kind of the favorite to be that starter opposite Dylan Stewart, and coaches are just super high on what he can do.
All right. Well, great stuff. Jordan, thanks for being with us. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. Be well. Get some golf in. Relax. And we'll look forward to catching up with you down the road. Thanks for hopping on this morning.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate you.
Yep. All right. That was Jordan Kaye from Go Gamecocks and the State. So thanks to him and to Alex Jones for being on with us as well from the Big Spur. Great show today, and we'll be back next week. Until then, God bless. Go Gamecocks. I am out of here.